Mrs. Rosey Posey and the Yummy Birthday Cake. Right in the middle of Poppyville, at the end of Mary Lane, is a big yellow house. Mrs. Rosey Posey lives there. Children love Mrs. Rosey Posey. One sunny day, Mrs. Rosey Posey got up early. She said, "Today is my birthday. I'm going to make a cake. It will be yummy." Mrs. Rosey Posey baked all morning. The first layer was chocolate with peanut butter balls. The next layer was strawberry. The third layer was vanilla with chunks of big fat brownies. Was Mrs. Rosey Posey done yet? Oh no! Next came kiwi and bananas. Layer 5 was fudge with nuts. Then came her favorite layer, coconut cake with candy hearts. Mrs. Rosey Posey smiled. "I'll add an apple to the top," said Mrs. Rosey Posey. This apple was dipped in caramel. It was rolled in chocolate chips. Every layer of the cake was perfect. She carried the cake outside. The birds were singing. Mrs. Rosey Posey sang along. She waited for the children to come. Sarah and Sam came first. "Hooray," said Mrs. Rosey Posey. "I'm so glad you are here." "What a beautiful cake," said Sarah. "Indeed," said Mrs. Rosey Posey, "but you may not eat it yet." "Then come with us," said Sam. "We have a surprise," said Sarah. The children led Mrs. Rosey Posey to the front yard. She opened her eyes. It was a parade. All her friends cheered and sang, "Hooray for Mrs. Rosey Posey." They all marched down Mary Lane. Sarah wanted to ride her bike in the parade. She ran back to get her bike. The cake looked so yummy. What do you think she did? Sarah reached up. She wanted to taste one chip from the apple on the very top, but Sarah bumped the table. Suddenly, the whole cake began to wobble. And then it happened. Ker-splat! The yummy cake fell down. "Oh no," said Sarah. She looked around. She was afraid. She hid behind the porch. Soon Mrs. Rosey Posey came. She called, "Sarah, Sarah, where are you?" "Here I am," said a small voice. "Why are you hiding?" asked Mrs. Rosey Posey. "I wanted to taste the cake," said Sarah, "but I made it fall." Mrs. Rosey Posey looked very sad. Sarah began to cry. "I'm so sorry." "I know you are. I forgive you," said Mrs. Rosey Posey. Sarah asked a wobbly question. Am I still special to you?" "Oh, yes," said Mrs. Rosey Posey. She smiled at Sarah. Her eyes had a twinkle. Her smile had a zing. Mrs. Rosey Posey had a secret. "Sarah, did you know that every time a person repents, God has a big party in heaven?" "What does repent mean?" asked Sarah. "Repent means saying you're sorry and meaning it. This makes God happy." Sarah smiled. Mrs. Rosey Posey said, "Do you know what makes me happy?" "What?" asked Sarah. "I like eating cake with my hands," said Mrs. Rosey Posey. All the children did the same. It was the yummiest cake ever. "Will you always be my friend, even if you don't like what I do?" Sarah asked Mrs. Rosey Posey. "Yes," she answered, "even then." I hope you enjoyed the story. Mimi loves you.